September 17, 1876, Montana Territory. In Helena, as winter approached, the men reinforced tall granaries, bought lumber, and erected warehouses with tin roofs. Preparation meant height, new planks, and enough money to pay for both. Ingrid Sørensen did the opposite. As the first snow touched the Elkhorn Mountains, she walked alone along Prickly Pear Creek carrying 2 empty flour sacks, a wood-splitting mallet, and $7 in cold coins. She had no horse. She had no home. She had been evicted that morning by her brother-in-law. It won't last a month. That's what they said. The almanac predicted the coldest winter of the decade, temperatures below 20 degrees below zero before November, and Ingrid was bending green trees against the hillside as if she were building something too low to survive the first snowfall. What no one there understood was simple. She wasn't trying to beat winter in the traditional way. She was trying not to be crushed by him. And that changed everything. Helena in 1876 was not yet a city. It was still a promise. Promises of gold, land, and quick riches. The buildings were straight, tall, and exposed. Men believed in straight lines. Ingrid didn't believe in straight lines. He was 41 years old. 3 weeks earlier, she had buried her husband in ground that was too shallow. Before that, 2 children, years ago, still during the Atlantic crossing. He spoke English with a strong accent. Don't laugh out loud. He didn't argue. I was working. When Ingrid Sørensen gave her until sunset to leave the cabin, she did not beg. He grabbed what he could carry in his arms. $7. No pension, no inheritance. In the Montana Territory, widows without property were dead weight. That's what they thought. They didn't say it out loud, but they thought it. She could have accepted the church basement. She could have asked for housework. He could have walked 43 miles east. But there was one thing she knew. The problem wasn't shelter. The problem was dry wood. 4 strings. It was the bare minimum to survive a winter there alone. Wet wood does not heat up. It produces smoke. Smoke in enclosed spaces can kill you while you sleep. She had seen this happen before. That was why he ignored the stairs when he began searching for a specific slope, one facing north, steep enough for the snow to slide off, not pile up. She was looking for land, not approval. To the city's eyes, she looked like a woman wandering aimlessly alone. But she was measuring wind, slope, and drainage. And when he found the semicircular rock formation created by an ancient landslide, he stopped. It was short. He was hunched over. It was ugly. It was perfect. Ingrid started at noon. 4 men from the loading area of the Helena Lumber Company were watching from 200 meters away. She felt their gaze like a physical weight on her back. There was no fence. There were no walls, just rock bent against the hillside like the inside of a barrel cut in half. She went into the stream bed. The undergrowth was dense with young poplars and slender willows, none more than 10 centimeters in diameter. Green wood, flexible. He cut 12 poles, each a little over 4 meters long. He was using a borrowed saw that he had promised to return before nightfall. The first stake was driven into the damp ground to a depth of 18 inches. 11 feet to the other side. She buried the other end. The willow bent over. The curve formed slowly, obediently. The arch hung suspended like a cart rib. He did it again, and again, 12 times. Patrick O'Connell approached around 2 in the afternoon. Mining engineer, Irish, practical. This won't hold a load of snow. She didn't stop. You won't need to. He looked at the height of the structure. Too low to store anything useful. Too high to be a hole. Are you going to live in there? No. She pulled another willow tree down. It's for firewood. He chuckled briefly. Green cotton and willow trees won't hold Montana back. She looked up at the hillside. The snow will reach 20 feet above that. It will slide over the top. He remained silent for a few seconds. Then he shrugged and went back. She continued. By dusk, the skeleton was ready. Arches spaced 16 inches apart. A low tunnel leading into the hill. Now came the part that seemed crazy. She began to weave. Slender willows about the size of a pencil grew above and below the green ribs. Like a basket. Like his father's charcoal ovens in Sweden. Each pole was pulled firmly before moving on to the next. The wind was blowing from the valley. The mesh started to get blocked. A miner commented loudly enough for her to hear, "It looks like a rat's nest." She didn't answer. She continued braiding, until the opening began to disappear. When the sun set behind the mountains, 3 feet of wall were closed. It was cramped. It was short. It was unlikely. And there was still something missing that would truly hold us back from winter. Clay. And if the clay cracked when it froze, it would destroy everything. The following morning, the frost killed the last summer flowers. Ingrid walked 200 meters upstream, where she remembered seeing firm clay soil. He tested it with his hands. He pressed. The dough held its shape. I needed fiber. The grass dried up. She took horse manure from the stable. It was free if she carried it. He mixed everything together on the ground with water from the stream. Mud, grass, manure, strong smell. She didn't mind. He applied the mixture with his hands inside and outside the braided mesh, filling every gap, layer after layer. Her fingers split open into sores. They dried up. They tore it again. Pastor Matthias Kruger appeared on the 4th day. The congregation may offer domestic work in exchange for a room in the basement. She climbed down the makeshift ladder. What time is it? 30, maybe 35 a week. And the room? 8 by 10 feet. Proper heat. Ingrid wiped mud off her palm. Thank you. But no. He observed the structure, which was partially covered in clay. That's inappropriate. A woman living like an animal on earth. She held his gaze. It's just firewood. He frowned. Pride is a sin. She climbed back up the ladder. Waste, too. He left. She knew she was running out of time. 47 days until deep freezing if the almanac was correct. I still needed to cut 4 ropes. And if the clay cracked in the first hard frost, all the effort would have been in vain. On the 6th day, the ceiling was lifted. The structure was now 3 inches thick and solid, but the roof was still missing. No money for tin, no boards. She climbed the slope and began to peel off thick slabs of ponderosa pine bark, 73 pieces in total, placed on the curve, overlapping like tiles, fastened with willow pegs. The shape of the shelter followed the natural curve, low enough for the snow to slide off, tall enough to house the pile of wood. Still, it seemed too fragile. On the afternoon of October 3rd, the first test arrived. Cold rain, 36 continuous hours, wind of 40 miles per hour. The stream rose. Ingrid sat under a tarp stretched between trees. The hole where she would live was still only half built, and watched the water flow down the slope, to trickle over the shelter, falling to the sides, without infiltrating. When the rain stopped, she opened the makeshift door made of burlap. He went in. He removed a piece from the middle of the pile. Dry, flawless, no musty smell. Patrick O'Connell returned that afternoon. He didn't laugh. He ran his hand along the wall. This is not fragile. She simply nodded. How much did it cost? $6.20. He stood still for a few seconds. I paid $38 for mine. She went back to digging her own shelter 20 feet to the east. Yours works too. He didn't answer. But the next day, 2 miners showed up asking how to bend willow trees without breaking them. And that changed something. The timber started arriving in significant volumes at the beginning of October. Ingrid cut lodgepole pine on the slopes above the creek. Straight, light trunks that burned cleanly if properly dried. She worked from dawn until the light disappeared behind the mountains. First cycle. Attempt. Cut quickly to gain volume. Small victory. 3 days yielded almost half a rope. Error. Rushing the cutting process. Correction. Slower pace. Precise strikes. The biggest proof. Open hands covered in blood before the week was over. She wrapped cloths around her palms and continued. He stacked them inside the shelter at a slight incline, with a wide base and space for air circulation. It wasn't just about storing them. It was about organizing them for proper burning. By the 10th day, it had almost 3 strings left. There was still half left, and the cold began to descend earlier in the late afternoons. That's when the real mistake happened. The hole where her dwelling would be, 20 feet east of the shelter, was still too shallow. She dug alone, throwing earth to form a slope that would serve as a cover. On the afternoon of October 9th, he tried to dig 1 foot deeper before nightfall. The ground seemed firm. It wasn't. The sideline gave way. It wasn't a complete landslide. It was worse, partial. Damp earth fell onto her shoulder and hip, trapping her up to her waist. The air left my chest. Silence. She tried to turn her body. The earth felt as heavy as wet concrete. If the other side gave way, it would close from above. There was nobody there. The stream ran too low to drown out any pleas, but also too far away for anyone to hear. She stopped struggling. He breathed shallowly. He remembered his father saying, "Loose soil falls twice. First scare, then adjust." She used her free arm to create lateral space, pushing with her forearm, not her hand. Slowly, removing enough earth to bend her knee. It took 20 minutes, or 40. There was no clock. When he managed to get out, he didn't try to continue. He covered the hole temporarily. He sat down on the hillside. My shoulder hurt. If it had broken there, $7 wouldn't buy help. That night, he didn't work. First time since she was expelled. The next day, he reinforced the walls of the dugout with horizontal logs before digging deeper. Error. Correction. The ultimate proof. In the middle of the second week of October, the fourth rope was finally stacked up to the ceiling of the curved shelter. She went inside and closed the rag. The space was small, almost claustrophobic, but the wood was dry. Winter was no longer an immediate sentence. It was a negotiation, and winter was arriving far too quickly. November 12, 1876. The temperature dropped to 8 degrees below zero overnight. 6 inches of snow, then 8 more, then 12. The wind descended from the continental divide like a blade. 60 miles per hour. The fences disappeared. The road to Helena was impassable for 3 days. This was the climate that was finding fault. Ingrid's dugout maintained an internal temperature of 48 degrees, solely due to the mass of the earth. No fire, just soil. When she needed to cook, she would fuel the small 3-legged stove with firewood from the shelter. It burned clean, no smoke accumulating. Second cycle. Attempt, relying on minimal ventilation. Small victory, steady fire. Invisible error, condensation on the dugout ceiling. Correction, small controlled opening on the side protected by tow. The ultimate test, retaining heat without poisoning the air itself. It was during that early winter that the city faced another type of risk. The Ekstrom family arrived on November 19th. Swedes. Promise of a false land. 3 small children. Johann coughing up blood. Elsa, 6 months pregnant. Pastor Kruger put them in the church basement, but he made it clear, until Christmas. Then, every man for himself. Enough firewood for 2 weeks. Ingrid heard about them through Li Wei, who had transported the family's few belongings. She walked to the church at dusk. The basement smelled of dampness and resignation. "How many strings do you have?" Elsa asked. "Maybe half." That wasn't a difficult question. It was calculation. Half a rope wouldn't last through December. Ingrid returned to her shelter that night and stood before the 4 stacked ropes. If we split it, we would be taking a risk. If she didn't share, she knew what would happen to the children. The third cycle began there. Suggestion: cut more wood during the winter. Small victory: lodgepole still accessible above the wind line. Mistake: underestimating accumulated fatigue. Correction: slow down, accept indirect help. The ultimate test: maintaining 2 simultaneous reserves. The next day, Ingrid returned to the church. "I need helpers to build 2 warehouses before spring." That was a lie. Paid in firewood. The children started stacking wood every afternoon. Johann was not getting better, but the basement began to heat up steadily. Ingrid was cutting. The children were organizing. Winter was setting in, and the wood burned cleanly. January arrived without warning. It wasn't a dramatic storm, it was silent. The kind of cold that doesn't make a sound because the air becomes too dense to move. -23 degrees on a morning that seemed ordinary. That morning, the city discovered that theoretical preparation and real preparation were not the same thing. A merchant's tall barn lost part of its roof under the weight of the accumulated snow. The wood stored inside had absorbed moisture from the frozen condensation and now burned poorly. Thick smoke. The chimney is clogged. Patrick O'Connell appeared on Ingrid's hillside shortly after noon. No hat. No irony intended. "My storage tank is damp." She stopped wielding the axe. "Has snow accumulated on the north side?" He nodded. And the wind pushed against the planks. The moisture got in. She didn't comment. He looked at the curved shelter, almost invisible beneath the layer of snow that slid naturally down the sides. "I need to store some of my wood here until I fix the roof." There was no pride in her voice. There was no formal request, just an observation. Ingrid opened the burlap door. The interior still retained a dry smell of pine. "Arrange them on the left side. Don't place them against the walls." He entered, stooped due to his short stature. He touched the mud wall. Solid. There was no excessive gratitude. He left. The following week, others came. A miner whose shed had warped. A merchant who had underestimated the crosswind. The structure that had been called a rat's nest now stored wood from 5 families. Ingrid rearranged the piles. He created ventilation shafts. He separated the batches according to consumption. No speeches, no lengthy instructions needed, just short gestures. Pastor Kruger appeared on a particularly cold afternoon. The church basement was hot, but the congregation's firewood was dwindling rapidly. "Mrs. Sørensen," he hesitated, "could you show us how your construction works?" She looked at the man who had called her improper. "It works because it's low." He waited longer. The snow slides off. The wind blows overhead. The clay holds in the moisture. Silence. He nodded. "Can we learn?" She simply handed over a freshly cut willow branch. "Fold it before it dries." The following spring, 3 similar structures were appearing in the city. Low curves against slopes, braided, sealed with clay. No one mentioned that the first one was built by a widow with $7, but everyone knew. Meanwhile, Johann Ekstrom was growing weaker. The cough wouldn't go away. He died on January 8, 1877. Not from the cold, not smoke. But it was an illness he already had before arriving. He died in a cellar heated by wood that his children helped to stack. There was no show. The city attended the funeral. Patrick stood by Ingrid's side. No comment. Elsa gave birth in February. A girl. He named her Inga. Ingrid didn't react when she heard the name. He only held the child for a few minutes before returning her. Winter ended in April. The curved shelter remained intact. No significant cracks. No seepage. The remaining wood is still dry. The snow began to melt at the end of March. First on the higher parts of the slope. Then, around the curved shelter. When the earth reappeared, the structure appeared to have grown from there, integrated into the hill. Low, discreet, without any airs or pretension. Patrick returned one morning in April with 2 men and a roll of string for marking. "We want to replicate the exact curvature." She measured 11 feet with firm steps, without a ruler. No drawing. The news spread slowly, as always happens in small places. I don't eat gossip. As a fact, that winter killed some animals. He broke into 2 high-rise buildings, but no one was killed due to a lack of dry firewood in that part of Helena. In March 1877, the Helena Weekly Herald published a short note about arched structures of willow and clay, demonstrating unusual effectiveness in storing wood. No name. It was not customary to quote women. Ingrid did not seek correction. She was already too busy. In the spring, he agreed to help 7 families build similar versions. He didn't charge a fixed price. Sometimes I would receive dried beans, sometimes fabric. Sometimes it's just a promise to reciprocate to another when necessary. Expanded second cycle. Attempt. Teaching others how to bend green wood. Small victory. First corners well executed. Error. Some allowed the willow to dry before securing it. Correction. Immediate reinforcement. Before the fiber hardens. The ultimate test. Convincing men accustomed to straight boards to trust low curves. The city changed without realizing it was changing. Curves began to appear against the slopes. Low arches replacing high angles. Less wood purchased. More wood observed. In 1880, the Montana Territory Census recorded Ingrid Sørensen as owning land valued at $180. Occupation recorded by the census taker. Instructor of practical techniques. 43 families had learned from her. Some added stone. Others used thicker pine bark. Some reinforced it with leftover pieces of sawn timber. But the logic remained. Don't fight against winter. Let it drip. The first shelter remained standing until 1912, when a forest fire swept through the canyon. But by that time, the technique was already widespread in Wyoming and Dakota. Faded photographs remain in historical archives. Curved structures, almost invisible against the ground. They seem to have grown up there, like roots. Ingrid never mentioned the $7. He never mentioned the deadline until sunset. I never commented on the initial laughter. When Anders, her brother-in-law, lost part of his own storage facility years later and needed to rebuild, he went to her. No tension, without a past being stirred up. She demonstrated how to bend the wood before it hardened. He didn't apologize. She didn't demand it. The city learned something that winter, but didn't say it aloud. Straight lines are fast. The curves are durable, and some people who seem out of place are simply seeing angles that others don't see. September 17, 1876 began with $7 and a deadline until sunset. It ended decades later with curves scattered across the territory. The winter of that year was not overcome. He simply found someone who observed him closely enough. Ingrid didn't build anything grand. He built something that worked. Low, curved, discreet. Some people cope with the cold by building higher walls. Others learn how snow falls, and when the world decides who seems too fragile to stay, sometimes it's precisely those who bend over backwards, and not those who remain rigid, that runs through the entire station.